Hi, everybody out there on Facebook. Thank you so much for taking some time this afternoon to join us to talk about the state of education. We know there is so much to talk about right now related to that topic. And so we hope to not only give some insight from the experts that we have joining us today, but also addressing some of your questions and concerns. So you can go ahead and leave them in the comments, and Carla and I will take a look at them as we go and try our best to get them answered. Just want to introduce who we have with us today. Obviously, you know Carla Navarrete, my fellow education reporter here. I love doing these together with her. We also have Stephanie Para. She is from All in Education, and also she's a governing board member for Phoenix Union High School District. So she has some great perspective from both the kind of district governing point of view and then also the education advocacy point of view. And then right below me here, we have Wes Brownfield. He is with the Arizona Rural Schools Association. So we really want to make sure that we are getting a good idea of what's happening in our districts all across the state right now. So we're just going to jump right in. Again, feel free to leave your comments. Carla and I will watch out for those. So Wes, first off, thank you so much for being here with us today. I want to start with you. We focus so much on Maricopa County and some of our more urban areas, but can you give us an idea what is the state of education right now in some of our more rural districts?
Well, in many ways, it's the same for everybody throughout the state, whether you're urban or rural or suburban. The impact of COVID, the concerns, the community concerns, public concerns around that. That's amplified though in rural communities. Rural communities, on top of the concerns and the sort of political divide that COVID and the response to COVID has created. Rural schools, they lack resources. And by resources, I don't just mean funding. They lack resources as far as staffing. It's difficult to find teachers who are willing to move to some rural remote communities. The tax bases are smaller typically. One of the other dynamics that occurs, demographic dynamics that occurs in so many rural communities is that the communities are becoming older. There's a Battelle for Kids study that identifies that as hollowing out. In other words, the middle class, the people who typically had good jobs when the sawmill was running or the concrete plant was running or whatever local economy was strong, as that decreases, those jobs tend to disappear. It's left with a community of school-age kids who are younger and retirees who live in rural communities, move to rural communities, because typically the cost of living is lower there. Some of the challenges that leaders have in rural communities is nearness, not nearness, but proximity to the community's concerns and fears over a crisis like COVID and the school district's response to it. And everybody knows the big political issue is to mask or not to mask. And that has created divisiveness in communities, in families. Mm-hmm. So everything that a urban district faces is really amplified in a rural district. Mm-hmm. So we all face, and then the other one that everybody faces is the learning gap. And there may be a misconception about how, well, once we go back in face-to-face, schools do that, we can make that learning gap up. Typically in the younger grades, that learning gap will take at least 3 to 4 years to make up. So you get a kid in elementary, particularly lower elementary, who has fallen behind in reading or math skills, you're not going to remediate that in the next semester or the next year of in-person learning. So you have two things that are absolutely true. It is often not safe to have in-person learning, because while the school itself is a safe environment, because you can train kids to mask, you can enforce social distancing, you can't control what happens at home. And we're about to see another example of that within the first 2 weeks after we come back from the Christmas vacation.
Yeah.
So remediating the loss that we have because we don't have an in-person contact, which is how kids learn best, it is going to be a multi-year effort.
So, in speaking of that, Wes, of the school, the decisions that are going to be made during the Christmas and New Year holiday from families, right? Whether they decide to gather or come together or congregate. How many of the districts or which districts that you're aware of are switching and going to online or hybrid, or are they staying in an in-person agenda so far? What can you tell us? What schools are staying in person?
Well, with very few examples, what they're waiting to do is for that next board meeting. What they're waiting, tomorrow we'll tell everybody a lot, you'll see the metrics. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that school boards are going to follow the metrics, but the metrics will inform the decisions that occur at governing board meetings. I was talking to a school district this morning that will not really, they are distance learning now. They will not have that board meeting to decide that until January 29th. Mm-hmm. Some will have that board meeting next week. The dates vary, but most governing boards and most superintendents are trying to buy a little time to sort of see how public opinion settles down, and they will make those decisions regarding next year in the later part of this month and the early part of January.
Yeah, and that's something that we will be watching very closely, even over the winter break and into next semester. Stephanie, Phoenix Union was really one of the first districts to say, hey, we're going remote for the whole first semester. They've decided to stay remote into second semester with a goal of potentially getting people back on campus by February, but that's a goal. Many of the districts in that surrounding area have also been remote this whole time since the spring. So, through your work as a governing board member, but also with All In Education, I know you have a great pulse on the community and what they're facing. How has this been for those districts that have never returned to in-person?
Yeah, I can tell you that our employees at Phoenix Union and certainly in our partner districts are working harder than they ever have before. I hear that often from both our certified educators, so teachers, social workers, our psychologists, counselors, and then our classified employees, our food service workers, our boxing and delivering meals. And so our employees are working incredibly hard in this environment to, while we are in distance learning, yes, we are in distance learning, but that does not mean that our schools are closed. We are, as our superintendent says, our classrooms might be empty, but the screens are full. Our students are learning online. And so they're working very hard, but we do have a lot of concerns about learning loss. As was just mentioned, we know that the best form of instruction is in person. And so as we're moving forward, that is what we are grappling with as a board and leadership team. But for us specifically, the data and the metrics have guided our decision making, and the data and the metrics for Phoenix Union and Phoenix proper are not safe. It is not safe. Most of our zip codes where our students live and where our schools are, and where our employees live, and and obviously where our schools are in red now. We're back, we definitely took some steps back after the Thanksgiving holiday. So it is not safe to come back in person. And we are going to make decisions that prioritize the health and safety of our students and our employees and the families that we serve. Mm-hmm. But we do have a lot of concerns about, our staff. the stress and the wellness of our employees. They are, like I said, they're working a lot, and they're under a lot of pressure. And this is a tense environment that we're living in. I also worry a lot about the wellness of our students, their social emotional well-being. I know early on, from an all-in-ed perspective, when we had community conversations, behavioral issues were starting to show up in the conversations with parents. And this was back in April and May. So can you imagine, after so much time behind a screen, that our students are having, likely having, it's taking a toll on their social and emotional health. And so those are also things that we have to be mindful of going forward. I also worry about the stability of families. Economic challenges were already showing up in the conversations that we had with the community in April and May. And so now, 9-10 months into this thing, the economic burden is going to be there across the state, especially in low-income communities. And these are the communities that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. And so, as a result, our schools are also disproportionately impacted. So the pandemic has really, what we've said all along, is it's exposed the inequity across our system that we've known has been there. And so we're seeing that take place across Maricopa County, but really across the state.
Yeah. And I know one thing that a lot of schools are struggling with right now, Carla, we've chatted about this, is needing bodies, quite frankly, in the classrooms, in the form of substitutes or, people who can help facilitate if they need to be doing online or in person at the same time. Wes, I know you talk a lot, you mentioned it off the top, about some of the staffing issues that exist already in rural communities. How has this kind of taken that to the next level? Are you seeing districts in dire need of substitutes? What's happening there as far as a staffing perspective right now?
Oh, it's nearing the disastrous. We have, it is stupendously impossible or difficult to get subs, because think about your average substitute teacher. Typically, they are someone who is retired, someone who is older. That is a group that has enormous risk factors when it comes to COVID. And I appreciate what Stephanie has said, because so much of that is so very true. The very hard work that staff is having to put in to support distance learning, and the hard work that they're having to face because they are so shorthanded because they can't get the staffing that they need. So you have people with bus drivers trying to cover classes, administrators. One of the great, I believe, after this is over, untold stories will be the number of school administrators who became infected because they had to substitute in so many classes, and because they interact with the students so closely. And the stability of families, the similarities between the problems that an urban low-income family face and a rural family are really similar in terms of access to services, income. One thing you have in rural communities is lack of access to childcare, which is one thing that drives a lot of community members to insist upon reopening, because those who do have jobs, they cannot afford childcare. And the school is often the only institution that offers dependable and safe childcare. And in rural communities, you may have the zip code, you may have the school in one zip code, but you've got staff members coming from multiple zip codes, and you have students coming from multiple zip codes. So you have a lot of people together that you really haven't been able to control or at least track the safety of their activities outside of school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we've got some viewer comments. Danielle Vera, she's been pretty vocal here saying, you know, she's going to be one of the first going to get the schools to stay open. It is so hard. She says, hope you guys get some relief and the doors open back to the schools soon so your kids can back into school. Just from the comments that we're seeing, most folks here, at least this morning, are saying we want our schools open, and we get it. But those districts and those school boards, I apologize, Wes, we were talking a little bit before the show, that dilemma that school boards face, having to wanting to maybe go to a hybrid model by the superintendent. I'm not calling out anyone specifically, but just in general. But that school board that's usually, you know, 5 to 7 members, and them trying to appease the community and trying to keep those doors open. What have some of these superintendents shared with you, Wes, about that? They're stuck in the middle. I mean, they're stuck between these two big forces. How have they handled that? What have you heard?
Well, you have to understand a couple things about a governing board. One is they are made up of some of the few people in the state who are actually elected representatives in education. You know, you have the state superintendent who's elected, you have county superintendents, there are 15 of them who are elected, and school board members who are elected. Well, as elected officials, it is their role, both by fiduciary duty and inclination, to speak for their community. Well, the communities are split, and most school boards are either 5 members or 3 members, so they don't split evenly. Typically what you have with a school board who will support a superintendent's desire to be very cautious about reopening, they're going to split 3 to 2, or sometimes they're going to be unanimous. But in many communities, you've got a 3-2 split of on the board who understandably want to respond to the community desires to get the kids back in school. I mean, so everyone agrees, I believe, that the best learning environment is an in-school, face-to-face environment. But the difficulty comes when you're the leader, is to try to balance that need against the safety of your staff members. And most of our teachers, most of our support members, a good many of our teachers, fall in risk categories. So it's a difficult line to navigate. What I see in so many of my rural districts is the intensity of reaction that has become politicized, and political reactions are rarely calm and thought through. So I know of, like I said, I know a board of superintendents who have boards who they don't care it does not matter what the metrics will say that when they come out tomorrow, those schools will stay open, and the superintendent will stay there and do the best they possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I've watched a lot of superintendents age in Zoom since March.
Yeah, and we've certainly seen this play out in several communities, especially recently. In fact, the Madison district just sent out a note this morning updating their families on their plans for second semester, of hoping to go back to hybrid mid-January. But what was really interesting to me was that at the bottom, there was a whole paragraph from the superintendent about, you know, we get that some of you are upset, some of you are happy. Let's please keep this respectful. We're better than that. So clearly there's been some stuff going on there, as well as we've been seeing in other districts. I wanted to bring up another comment that we got. This was way back at 12:05. So I don't know if we'll be able to go all the way back and find it, but it was from Brittany. And she's really looking for some help for young children who are maybe lacking in the classroom because they've been online. Stephanie, through your work with All in Ed, what sorts of resources have you been pointing families to in some of these communities that maybe have been online this whole time? How have you guys been trying to get support to these communities?
Yeah, so there's actually a really great website that was compiled. It's wideopenschool.org, and it has a ton of resources for parents that they can do activities with their students at home to keep them engaged, keep them active and connected. And it's everything from academic activities, but also physical activities. When I talk about like the social, emotional stress and toll that it's taking on kids, like giving them a break and having them do some exercise. And so that website is such a great resource, wideopenschool.org. Yes. I'm part of the Superintendent Hoffman's technology task force, and this is one of the tools that that was shared with us. That was a really great resource. So definitely use those tools, and we'll definitely be having more. The technology task force is working on compiling a toolkit for parents that we're hoping to release soon as well, with additional resources and tools that they can use.
So one thing I wanted to bring up, another comment, Nikki Moore. Thank you, Stephanie, by the way. But I was reading Nikki Moore's comment here at 12:23. She says, how does it make sense that we have restaurants open, but we have to shut down our schools? Our children need to be more of a priority. The toll that it is taking on our children's mental health is irreparable. The data doesn't support closing the schools. Schools is the safest place for them. If your guidelines are followed, teachers and students are not at increased risk of being in the school setting. I want to bring that up because I did interview Will Humble, former director of health for Arizona, and he did say, and it just stuck out to me because it was so clear. He said, Carla, like Wes, you said, I think the best place for kids to be is in the classroom. But those principals, those administrators, that administrative stuff at every single school has to have strict mitigation policies. If you're asking kids to wear a mask, make sure that they're wearing a mask. Have repercussions for those who don't. Have social distancing, because you don't want to loosen up on those guidelines, loosen up on your policies, and then before you know it, you don't have a system in place to be able to mitigate COVID once it happens at your school. So I thought that was really, really neat that Nikki brought that comment up. And Nikki, I can tell you from Will Humble's interview with me a few months ago, that is, I believe that is the key to all of this, is that yes, schools do remain open, but that those administrators that are in charge of these schools really hold people highly, highly accountable for their actions, because we all want to keep our kids safe above all. So whether you prefer online or you prefer in person, for those who are open and are in person, that is the message from the former director of health. And, he takes into account the mental component that our kids are going through, the mental health aspect of isolation. I can tell you, last night, my 13-year-old son, when I tucked him into bed, he said, Mom, I really, really want COVID to end, and I said, I want it too. I'm right there with you. I think we're coming to the point where we're all exhausted from it. Aren't we all just getting ready to say enough is enough? But this is the part where we really crusade ourselves to being diligent about the mitigation strategies to the fullest extent, because we're so close to the finish line, in my opinion, of getting the vaccine to be rolled out in our state and across the country. So again, I just wanted to share that with Nikki since she brought those comments up.
Yeah, and I think, we focused a lot on the fact that we are a local control state. And so each district governing board makes the decision that they feel is best for their community. But then you have other communities seeing other communities doing things. And, it can cause that divisiveness and that struggle as districts try to make the best decisions for their own communities based on their own data and the priorities there. And, and we've seen districts try to accommodate the younger learners, kind of place a little bit of heightened preference on them as far as getting them back in the classroom, but keeping the high schoolers out. We have districts who have closed a few high schools to try to mitigate the spread there, taking more of a school by school approach. So it is really all over the map. And I think that's why it's really important that people Also make sure that they are well versed in what their district is doing, their own district's policies, following those board meetings, and making sure that they're staying involved that way as well. So I know that we are about to go into the winter break, and so I think most people are hoping that, okay, let's just take a breather here and reset. But I know that for school boards and districts, they're still thinking about this. They're still going to be working on this. And so, Stephanie, we'll start with you, and then I'd love to hear Wes's perspective as well. But, Stephanie, what are board members doing right now with this information? What are they watching? What's going on kind of behind the scenes of our school districts right now in some of our more urban areas?
Yeah. So I can tell you at our December board meeting, which our meetings are the first Thursday of every month. So our meeting happened earlier this month. Our team walked the board through a day in the life of a student. And that's essentially how we are planning for reopening, where we are intentionally looking at what does a day in the life of every single student that walks through Phoenix Union doors look like, from the moment they get on transportation to get to school, to the moment they show up at the front door and then navigate their day. We're all high school, so they're navigating their day from classroom to classroom. What does that look like? And then, what could potentially happen if a kid, forgets the mask at home? What's our response going to be? That's the level of planning that is happening at schools. And it's going to take that level of planning and strategy to be able to safely reopen schools. And I can tell you that's why our teams are working harder than they ever have before, because they have to account not just for teaching and learning, which is what they are experts at. Now they have to consider all of these mitigation tactics and strategies to ensure the health and safety of students and employees alike. Because it is not just a single student that we are worried about. We have over 30,000 souls at Phoenix that call Phoenix Union home, from students and employees, and we have to make sure that we keep all of them safe. And so that is the level of planning that's happening right now behind the scenes. And so that's what it's going to take for us to be able to safely reopen schools, for our team to come back and say, we've done the analysis, we have a plan laid out. And I know for our board, the data is going to drive our decisions. Mm-hmm. It is not the politics. It is not, the chatter that's happening online or whatnot. It is the health and safety of our community that has to be paramount. And we have to focus on that. When leaders focus too much on politics over lives, that's why we're in this situation to begin with, to be honest. And so we have to put our kids and their well-being first. And I know that there's a lot of that impacts a family unit. As I said earlier, we know that in-person instruction is the most effective way to deliver education, hands down. We absolutely know that, and our goal is to get to a place where we can safely provide in-person instruction, but we don't want to make rash decisions based on politics and then have to, take a step back and have an outbreak at a site, and then, before you know it, we're back online anyway. So we want to be thoughtful in our processes.
Absolutely. And then, Wes, I'd imagine similar conversations, similar things happening right now in our rural districts as well, as they start kind of finalizing their plans for second semester.
Oh, absolutely. Stephanie, I know a dozen rural superintendents who would love to have you on their governing board. I wish I could say that I knew more districts who took that approach. Now, that doesn't mean that most don't. Most of my rural members, their superintendents and their boards do their very best to make a decision that is based on what's best for the kids and what's best for the adults in that school, which is also the responsibility of the superintendent. It has just been my experience, and this is sort of a general statement, that it is easier for politics to find its way into those board meetings and those discussions in a rural setting than I believe it is in an urban setting.
Mm-hmm.
Say that again, Wes. You say it's easier in the rural setting or it's harder?
Well, it's easier for politics to find its way into those discussions.
In the rural setting?
In rural settings, yes. The simple act of wearing a mask has become so politicized. Mm-hmm. And the mask has become a metaphor for people's political beliefs.
Right.
Yeah. So there are definitely plenty of challenges with this school year to talk about, but we also want to make sure that we talk about some of the things that are working. Stephanie, I know you touched on nutrition teams, finding ways to keep students and families fed. Can you just kind of list off what is working right now, especially in those districts that have been remote since the spring?
Yeah, I can jump in and share. I can tell you, the things that are working are the school districts that have effective communication plans and outreach, community engagement strategies work the most because, especially in the communities that we're worried about when you think about learning loss, it's the students that don't have access to internet. It's the students that don't have support at home, with their education. So how are we reaching out to those communities and being intentional and providing the supports? That is an effort that has to be made on the district's behalf. And so I have spoken to the superintendent of Tucson Unified, who had a great outreach strategy with Spanish-speaking families to make sure that they stayed in the loop on a weekly basis on how to engage and support their students at home. Because prior to that, I had spoken to Spanish-speaking families who had not heard from their school community since schools had closed, and I can guarantee you that there are families out there across the state, whether it's in urban or rural Arizona, that have not had communication from their school because communication is only sent out via an email form or only in English, for example, and it is not communication that they reach or that they understand. So effective communications plans have to be implemented. And also on the parent side, I would say, we're always encouraging parents to, if you have a question, don't stay silent. If something isn't clear, don't stay silent. Ask. Engage with your child's teacher, the school principal, ask questions. I think most administrators that I've spoken to and school leaders are really, they want the community to reach out. They want parents to let them know, what's working, what's not working, because without that information, especially in a distance learning environment, we can't adapt and adjust to provide additional resources. So definitely want to encourage that outreach and communication from parents as well.
Danielle, you mentioned about what is working, and I know I've been keeping really close tabs with the Mesa Public Schools and their nurse, their head nurse, their health director, and man, they have a robust program for vaccinations for the flu that they roll out every year, school to school. They bring in paramedics, firefighters. It's a team effort between the Mesa Fire Department and the Mesa Public Schools community. And they really have been doing this for, I want to say it's been about 15 years. And so I reached out to them recently because I said, once the COVID vaccine is out, are you planning to be part of that rollout? And she said, when the time comes, I'll let you know how we're going to be supportive of that. But, looking back, and I talked to Nadine Miller and I said, the fact that you've been doing the flu shot so well for so long, is that going to help you during COVID? And she said, absolutely, Carla, because we've already have those lines of communication so well established between two public entities, the fire department and the school, that we should be able to do just as we did with the flu, to go ahead and do that with COVID if and when the time comes. So thinking about those connections, as Stephanie, you were mentioning, those lines of communication, right, are so key. You don't want any little bit of a message to be left for questioning or for I didn't know. I know that at my kids' school, the communication has been amazing. But there was one moment where there was one little bit of information that didn't come to parents. It came from the kids. And boy, did it kind of cause a little bit of an upheaval of like, wait, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. So, for the schools to be at the forefront of that communication, and we get it, it's hard. The communication and the information that's coming forward is ever changing, right? It changes from 1 minute to the next. So I want to give kudos to all of those public administrators that are working really, really hard at doing their best. And we know that they aren't perfect. They're humans just like us. But I want to give them a big shout out and a big kudos because, man, not only are they handling the safety mechanisms at school, but they're also rolling out information to us as parents.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many different factors at play and groups involved and processes to follow in all of this. Something that came to mind when we were talking about what's working or maybe some advantages that teachers are finding. Wes, in some of our rural communities, I was actually speaking with the superintendent of Natterburg the other day, and she was saying that, they were able to open in person sooner because they're a smaller, they have smaller class sizes, and they were able to actually get a good amount of distance between their students in most of their classrooms. Are there any things in our rural communities that maybe have been helping during this time, or some of the things that you'd like to highlight of how they're making it work?
Well, that very thing, size. The size works both for and against districts. But in Natterburg, with that superintendent, you've got a superintendent who out the gate communicated clearly with her parents, with her community. You almost cannot communicate too much, because if the community senses any failure to communicate, either real or perceived, then that's where social media and speculation and rumor will creep in. So it is the ability of a superintendent to move quickly and clearly with communications. You've got schools like Beaver Creek up on I-17. That superintendent has been able to stay in person for a couple of reasons. It's a fairly small, cohesive community. She's a superb communicator. So she was able to manage the whole communication piece flawlessly. So the same thing that works, the size and scale can work for you if you're clear out of the gate and you communicate clearly and know your parents. Like Stephanie was talking, if you have a significant EL population or significant Latino population and you fail to communicate in Spanish and on multiple platforms, then that's an astounding failure in leadership and an astounding failure to understand your community. So it's, I think typically what you will see is the districts that communicated early and educated their communities early and set clear expectations early are going to be able to manage this process better. But once doubt creeps in, that is very, very difficult to counteract.
Wow.
Well, I think we have just a couple more minutes here. Man, that time flies real fast when we're talking about all of this. So just as we go here, I want to make sure that we leave folks with some information where they can empower themselves, they can learn more. And so for each of you, Stephanie, we'll start with you. Where should people be looking for the latest updated information? Are there certain resources? I know you mentioned Wide Open Schools, but any other places where parents or families can turn to right now just to make sure they're staying up to date because things are changing so fast?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, I think definitely staying closely connected to your school district where or charter school where your child goes to school. That is the most updated information will be available there. And I think most schools, I know Phoenix Union, we created a site that has kind of even a data dashboard, kind of the data that we are seeing as a board is available for the public to view as well. So that's pxu.org, phoenixunion.org. But again, wherever your child is going to school, stay connected to those, to your district information. And then, keep an eye out. Danielle would love to come back when the superintendent releases the parent toolkit that we're working on. That we've compiled a list of resources. Wide Open School is one of them. But of course, we at All in Education want to be a resource to the community. Our website is allineducation.org. Feel free to connect with us if you have any questions or experiencing challenges. Or don't know, are calling and not getting questions answered. Please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help parents navigate the system as well.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you so much. Wes, do you have any resources for the community that is watching us from rural Arizona as far as resources through this pandemic and for the next school year as it begins to take place?
Well, I will repeat what Stephanie says. Wide Open Schools is a great resource. I will say one advantage that we do have is that we have a top-notch superintendent of public instruction. And I know that Superintendent Hoffman has put together a brain trust, Stephanie being one of them, to design the parent dashboard to respond to this. So for me, that's one of the brightest spots in the response to this is the skill and commitment of Superintendent Hoffman. Also, Stephanie could have said it better, pay attention to your district's website. And I would caution anyone to trust the website and be very careful about anything that social media says.
Okay, thank you so much. We appreciate you. I think that's going to wrap it up for us. It's 12:45, and I just want to thank Wes and Stephanie for taking the time out of your day to join us. It is very, very much appreciated. We hope our viewers, our Facebook Live viewers, had an opportunity to learn a little bit more about how to manage all of this. Be safe out there during these times of COVID and during these holiday season, whatever it is that you decide to do. With you and your family, just know that we care about our community, we care about each other. And Wes and Stephanie, thank you again from this public servant over here to Danielle over there.
Yes, thank you so much. And this will be available. I know we have people kind of popping in and out through this whole 45 minutes, but this will be available on our website, abc15.com/town hall is where we keep all the town halls. So feel free to head back there, check them out. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you all